You've got to experiment. You've got to be a scientist. You've also got to be willing to mess up. If you're going into podcasting with this idea of perfection, that you're going to get everything right the first time, then you may want to reconsider podcasting.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Welcome back to the podcast on podcasting. It's your host, Adam A. Adams. And today we have Anna Dearmon Kornick on the podcast. She is a time management coach. In fact, her podcast is all about time management. She supports other business owners to be able to manage their time more effectively, more efficiently, so that they can control their time instead of their time controlling them. The podcast name is It's About Time, a podcast about work-life balance. I hope you're doing well today. And
I am, yeah.
Awesome. So tell me why you started a podcast, It's About Time.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. It is such an honor to join you, spend time with you today, and to speak into your audience who are learning how to really enhance their podcasts, maybe start a new one. So really, really excited to be here. And when I made the decision to start my podcast, it was just a few months after starting my business as a time management coach. And I knew that I wanted to have a very consistent way to serve my audience as I was growing it. Not everyone can afford the financial commitment of working with their very own time management coach right off the bat. And so it was a really great way for me to serve my audience and to really begin building that know, like, and trust factor that we want to cultivate as business owners in order to convert those listeners into clients.
And as you were starting it, as you were like in your beginning stages, knowing that you wanted this podcast to be part of your business, starting it around the same time as the business was launching, I'm sure you ran into a lot of different challenges. Do you mind sharing a few of those with the listener?
Sure. Well, whenever you do anything for the first time, you often don't know what you don't know. And even using something like a course to help you get everything set up, you still encounter challenges along the way as you take what you've learned and apply it to your own podcasting practice. And so one piece of advice that really did not serve me, that I had to trial and error and find out myself, was that I kept reading over and over again, don't script your episodes. Don't write out your episodes word for word. You'll sound mechanical. You'll sound like a robot. And all the advice was outline your episodes and then speak from the heart and record and then edit from there. And I'll tell you what, I followed that advice because I thought that's what I had to do to be successful. And that did not work for me. That did not work for me. I could not create coherent episodes operating just from an outline. And then it hit me. I spent my middle school and high school years competing in prepared speaking competitions, delivering scripted speeches. Now, why I thought that all of a sudden I was just going to step right into delivering outlined episodes is beyond me. And it really gave me that permission to, no, you need to do this your way. Everyone else might tell you operate with an outline, but you've got to trial and error and figure out what truly works best for you.
Yeah. So what's right for one person might not be right for the next person.
Absolutely.
For sure, I don't think I'd be able to read an episode. Being dyslexic, that would just be horrible. So I have to speak from my heart. I love that. And I think that there's going to be at least somebody that is listening that resonates with that knows that they're going to be better doing what you do, scripting it out. How long are your episodes?
Typically anywhere from 17 minutes to 34 minutes, or sometimes longer if I'm diving deeply into a topic. And then interview episodes typically run a bit longer because the conversation is just really robust.
So between the interview episodes and the episodes that you do solo and that are usually scripted, what's the balance between them? Is it 50-50? Do you do more of the interview style or do you do more by yourself?
Yeah, for the most part, it's 50-50. So I recently celebrated my 100th episode, and I have, episode 102 is publishing this week. And for the most part, I've kept a pretty steady rhythm of interview solo in order to keep that balance. I love teaching on time management and productivity tips, strategies, and hacks, but I also love the interviews because you get a peek behind the curtain to find out how people are really doing life. And I love sharing that. And so I do my best to keep it even, but there are some seasons where it's a lot easier on my personal schedule to just release 4 interviews in a row and then pepper in a solo episode, because they each require different types of work and different types of engagement in order to make them successful episodes.
With the interviews that you do with other people, how do you usually find your guest?
Oh, to begin with, I found my guests just through my own personal connections. I knew that I wanted to interview ambitious women who had a lot on their plate. So I looked in my own network to find women who were running small businesses with full-time jobs while raising children. And from there, asking them, hey, I would love to interview more people just like you. Who in your circle could you connect me with? And so many of my interview guests have been found through personal connections, which really creates just a much richer conversation. But there have been other guests, other experts that I've sought out and found in Facebook groups, podcasting Facebook groups, or I've received some really fantastic guest pitches from either authors or publishing companies or just other groups like that. And if somebody really seems special, then I'll give them a shot.
That's cool. You mentioned in the beginning of sharing that you used to find a lot of women in your network. Mm-hmm. Out of curiosity, just to be clear, is your podcast for women and you only interview women, or is it, how do you do your interviews and your podcast, and who's your avatar?
Yes, that is such a great question, because having that established from the get-go really does help you have just laser focused direction on who you serve, who you're speaking to, and how you can serve them. So my ideal listener avatar is a 34-year-old woman named Andre. And
Andre.
Yeah, like Andre. And in addition to Andre, I also speak with Corinne, who is a manager and a mother. I speak to Vicky, who is a business owner with older children, and really tailoring my content to these 3 women who all have very similar desires. They want to feel confident in their day-to-day life. They have a lot on their plate. They sometimes feel overwhelmed, and they're just looking for a better way from someone who's been there. And in creating content for them, that is what inspires me to seek out women who will inspire, educate, entertain, and really relate to Andre, Vicky, and Corinne.
Good stuff. Earlier, you mentioned that, I think you said something to the effect of, even if you take a course for podcasting, even if you do that, there's some things that you need to learn and do. And that not every piece of advice is the same or for everybody. I was wondering, when you said that, did you take a course when you started?
I did.
Okay.
And funny enough, I was not expecting to start a podcast. I was planning to create a YouTube channel for my audience. But after polling my Instagram audience and those fans and those followers and those connections that I had already created, there was a resounding request for audio content, for passive content, so that they could multitask while listening. My audience doesn't want to sit and watch a YouTube video. They want to get productivity tips while they're folding the laundry. And so I just happened to have access to a podcasting course, Jenna Kutcher's Podcast Lab, that I had purchased in a bundle with about 20 other courses. It was just collecting dust on my laptop. And so I said, you know what? I've got this. I'm going to take it. Let's just roll with this and see what we learn.
That's really cool. When you took that, well, first off, I need to share, or not share, but make sure to highlight something that you said, was that what I was wondering is with the YouTube channel, or I guess what I needed to highlight is, you mentioned that you were planning on doing a YouTube channel, but we identified your perfect avatar, and your avatar is looking for time hacks, life hacks, being able to be more efficient. And I thought it was interesting that you mentioned that you were planning on starting a YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. You wanted to start a YouTube channel, but instead you did a podcast because it seemed like you felt like that you would really be able to get to your avatar. And I really wanted to highlight that because I think many people listening might be thinking that they should be going one direction or other, whether it's blog or YouTube or writing a book or having a podcast. And just identifying the avatar like you have will allow us to be able to, I guess, pivot to the right place to be able to get in front of our avatar. And I didn't want to miss talking about that because I thought that was really on point. So I'm glad you shared it. As you've done all of your podcast, here's my other question. This is what happens when you have ADD. Here we go. So basically, with your course that you started to learn and grow, and you put all these courses out, or you listen to them or watch them, I'm curious if there was any aha moments, like as if you thought that podcasting was going to be one thing, but during learning through this course, you learned that you ought to pivot it before you did it, besides just not doing a YouTube channel, but doing a podcast.
Mm-hmm. So I would say that the biggest aha moment didn't have to do with content or the timing of the episodes or even the frameworks of the episodes. But the biggest aha moment that I took from the learning that I did before launching was how important it is to spend time creating a system and a repeatable process for producing each of your episodes from start to finish. Because when you live in the weeds from week to week of producing your show, you don't have the capacity to step into that visionary role and identify what is that content that's going to best serve my audience? How can I grow my audience? How can I leverage what I've done so far? Because when you're in the weeds, you're just in the weeds.
Yeah, you can't see the forest through the trees. Love that. Mm-hmm. With your repeatable process, you realize that you're going to need to do that. Like, what did you implement in your podcast to make it more repeatable that maybe the listener could learn from?
Sure. So as I was producing my very first episodes on launch day, I published 5 episodes. So that meant that before I began the week-to-week grind, I had 5 episodes under my belt. And so as I was creating those episodes, I would write down the steps that I was taking in a notebook. And as I was writing down the steps for each episode, I began to figure out what's the best order to do things in. What do I need to do first in order to open up the ability to do something further down in the process? And so once I had that process identified, written down, and it is a slow, painstaking exercise to create this, I put each of those steps into a project management tool called Trello. So my process for each podcast episode lives in Trello. I have a different process for interviews and a different process for solo shows because they have different components and different pieces that have to be put together. And so now every time I start a new episode, I'm not having to remember the steps. The steps don't live in my head, and I'm able to just go down the list, follow each step, and check them off. And now that I'm working with a marketing assistant in my business who is taking over a large chunk of those podcast production tasks, that transition to having her take on things like graphics creation, show notes creation, guest relations was seamless because of this thoughtful process that I had created before day one.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm trying to think which parts of that are going to be the most beneficial to the listener. I'm looking at you talking about how like your personal individual episodes where it's just you pouring into the listener are different from the episodes where you do interviews. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I do about 50-50 as well. And I don't know if I'm doing the process differently. So I'd like to learn from you. What are some of those things that are highlightable between the process that you might be doing for like a solo episode versus a interview episode?
Absolutely. So the biggest difference in the two is that when you're doing that guest episode, you have those information pieces and those details that you've got to collect in advance. One way that I streamline that process is by using a scheduling tool. I use Acuity. And so every time a guest schedules an interview, they have the fields or a form to complete where they submit their bio, their full name, links to their website, links to anything that they'd like to promote. They share their personal home address so that I can send them a gift to thank them for their time. And so all of that is collected right off the bat. And I'm able to move those details that I collect in Acuity over to the Trello card that represents each episode in Trello with my process attached to each one. And as I'm sure you know, like whenever you create a solo episode, you can create the entire episode almost in one sitting. You think through your intro, you think through the body of your episode, and then you think through and you record your outro. Well, it's a little bit different with a guest episode because first you've got to have the interview, and then you have to go back and decide what are the most compelling pieces of this that will be of the most value to my audience. And how do I package this episode to sell it in the intro? Because, you only have maybe a minute whenever a listener tunes in to capture their attention to convince them to listen to your full episode. So after the interview, your work's not done. You've got to think through, what do I want to title this in a compelling way? How do I tee this up in a way that serves my audience and benefits the person who gave their time to your show? And making sure that each of those pieces is captured in your process so you don't forget and so you don't scramble and wait until the last minute.
Yeah, scrambling and waiting to the last minute is the way to hate your life.
Yeah, it's the way to burn out and quit.
Number one thing that I was curious about, because I use Calendly, which will link Calendly into the show notes. So whoever's listening, they can scroll down. But I also wanted to be able to link Acuity, but I honestly don't know how to spell it. I haven't used it myself. So would you mind spelling it for the person who's editing the podcast? And they'll make sure that the link is in the show notes as well.
Sure. It's Acuity.
Okay. I made a Q instead of a C. So Acuity. Perfect. So we'll make sure that that's in the show notes, a link to it. And then one of the things that you mentioned is you only have a minute to grab your listeners' attention. And I actually made an episode specifically about that. So I'm passionate about it, but I don't hear a lot of other people mention that it's important. And so I thought that it was really interesting that you mentioned that. And I'd like you to go into more detail, if you don't mind, just when you're talking about titling it and teeing it up. You mentioned that when you do an interview with somebody else, I think you said like after you do it, you're going to make sure that you do some things like titling it and teeing it up. Could you go into more detail on it?
Sure. I actually did that just this morning for an upcoming episode. So after an episode's recorded, I upload it into a program called Descript that transcribes, and you can also use Descript to edit. And I'll take that transcription and read through the transcription of our conversation, and I'll highlight that. First, I'll go through, and as I'm reading, I'll highlight interesting quotes. I like to create social media graphics that highlight 3 really compelling quotes that capture the essence of the episode. So I'll highlight really great quotes, and those quotes then make their way into the process for my marketing assistant to create the graphics. But after the quotes, I will really decide what are the main 4 points that I want to highlight in order to entice someone to listen. So why
do you pick 4? Why not 3? Why not 5?
Okay, so I pick 4 because the graphic template that I use to promote the show on Instagram and Instagram feed and Instagram stories, it has 4 spots. That is literally the reason why. If that graphic did not have 4 spots, I would probably just highlight 3, but 4 works.
Okay, cool. You also mentioned Descript, and you said that it does 2 things for people. We use Descript as well. You said that it does 2 things for people. One of them is it'll help to transcribe, and the second one is it helps to edit. You're not editing your own podcast right now, are you?
Actually, right now I am, but I don't typically edit my own podcast. I'll say that. Like from the get-go, one of the first things I did was hire an editor, and then I transitioned to a production team. And then in the past few months, I've transitioned to editing myself, but I'm getting ready to tee that back up to a new editor. But I am editing right now.
Like, what made you go, so you went editor, production team, and then yourself. What made you go from a production team to self editing?
Sure. Oh gosh, this is so embarrassing, Adam, coming from a time management coach, but I had a baby in March. And I had a lot of episodes banked. And then once I began to create episodes again, the timing was really difficult for me to meet the deadline in order to have the episode packaged and over to the production team in time to get everything ready to go. And so because I was kind of operating on this new mom, lack of sleep way of running my show, which I do not recommend to anyone, I really needed to just tackle it myself in the time that I had available. So that means that if I was up at 2 a.m., I could edit the podcast then myself, and I didn't have to rely on the deadline for another team. And so that's the biggest reason why, but we're about to tee that back up to the production team again.
Okay, cool. So if you had a recommendation to somebody listening who might be brand new, like just starting their podcast and maybe deciding between, should I edit myself or should I pass it on to a production team? What considerations would you give somebody brand new?
Oh gosh, the first consideration I would give is, what can you afford right now? Really, what can you afford? Because as much as I would love to tell you outsource as soon as you possibly can, I also want you to run your business and treat your podcast like it's a business and not overcommit your financial resources. So first, make sure that you truly can afford to hire an editor. And if you can, outsource as soon as you can. But if you can't, and if you're still in that growing phase and you're beginning to flesh out what your budget looks like, Descript is an amazingly easy, user-friendly program for editing. And if you've got to DIY it, then definitely check out that program.
Okay, cool. With all that you've learned over 102 episodes so far, and by the way, the link to your podcast is in the show notes. So if a listener wants to just check it out, all you got to do is just scroll down and click. You can also click on those 3 links that we've already discussed, like Calendly and Descript. But if you want to jump over to Anna's podcast, just scroll down and learn a little bit more about time management. And also, if you give her a rating and review, would be awesome if you would mention that you heard about her here. Anna, see, I knew I would make a mistake. I told you, I was like, hey, say your name because I don't want to say it wrong. I've always noticed that Annas and Annas don't like being called the other thing.
I mean, it's whatever. I would prefer to be called Anna, but I mean, I'm not going to bite anyone's head off if they call me Anna.
All right. Well, forgive me. I know I'll save my head, but I still apologize.
Yeah. Oh, you're fine. Thank you.
So through your experience from the time that you started, what hacks might you want to share? Tips or tricks might you want to share? And or what software or automation tools would you like to share that we haven't maybe already discussed?
Sure. Ooh, lots of things to talk about there. Honestly, one of the first things that I would tell you that really takes me all the way back to launching. So if you have not launched yet and you're listening and you're trying to strategize how you want to get the word out about your show, leverage a launch team to help you get the word out about your show and to really begin to gather those reviews for your podcast, those ratings and reviews early. A launch team is what enabled me to, a total nobody, to I believe I had about 500 downloads just in my first 24 hours. And again, I'm not a celebrity. I'm not a famous person. I was just taking my first shot at a podcast, but having the support of a launch team really enabled me to just run out of the gate full speed. The next thing that I would tell you is that find a project management tool that fits the way you think. And if you are new to this, try Trello. Trello is a really easy, simple project management tool that you can use to store templates and just your processes so that you're getting your step-by-step method for creating your podcast week after week out of your head and into an external brain. Let it live somewhere else so that you have the brain space to think about bigger things, to think big picture. And then finally, I would, just in terms of hacks, really having that process and knowing how much time each piece of your process takes you is also key, because you know that if you get in a pinch and you have to squeeze an episode into a day, how much time does an episode take you? I know that it takes me, if I'm doing an episode by myself, start to finish, that it takes me about 6 hours. And so that's something that everyone needs to know, because our time is limited. Time is our most precious, non-renewable resource. And when you have a handle on how much these repeatable activities take you, you can plan so much better and make the most of your time.
So going back to, I really got two main things. Yes, I know that one of them was know your process, but I am going to bundle it up with the second thing that you mentioned, which was basically using some type of automation tool or a process that will allow things to be automated. Basically, I think you said take your brain out and give it to this. And I think you use Trello for that, right?
I do. I use Trello. I've used Asana as well, and both of them work great.
So we'll make sure to link to Trello and Asana so that the listener can look at those resources. But the question that I had for you was, how hard was it to know what to even put in there? Like, how did you learn what to even put in there? Because if we're brand new, like, we might make a mistake and make it completely ass backwards.
Yeah, but that's what trial and error is for. You've got to experiment. You've got to be a scientist. You've also got to be willing to mess up. If you're going into podcasting with this idea of perfection, that you're going to get everything right the first time, then you may want to reconsider podcasting, because it is just one mistake after the other that you learn from and that you keep moving forward after. And in figuring out what your process is, it's really as simple as starting to work on an episode the same way that you always do and writing down your steps on a sheet of paper. Yeah. And then asking yourself, hey, does this make sense? I realize I'm zigging and zagging from working on this piece of show notes to creating this piece of social media. How can I streamline? How can I batch? How can I do similar tasks together? Can I create all of my graphics in one sitting? Can I, in one sitting, write my intro and outro, pull my quotes for social media, pull my 4 compelling points, and title the episode and write the description? Can you do that all in one sitting when it's fresh before you move on to another phase of the process? Everything that you just said was just so on point and so helpful and supportive to somebody who's in their process for podcasting, even if they've been doing it for a couple of years. I think we could learn a lot from that. And one of the things that I might keep as a quote for you, just like you were mentioning that you pull sometimes like 4 main ideas. I liked that part where you're just saying, like, if you're going into podcasting, like basically thinking that you're going to be perfect at it or needing to be perfect, then you're really going to be sorely mistaken. Right. Not to put words into your mouth a little bit, but the point being like that you've been learning as you go. You've been pivoting, you've been making mistakes. And I think some people that are starting a podcast want it to be perfect. They want it to be great. And of course we all do. But I just like the way that you basically give us permission that to make those mistakes. It made me think of like Michael Jordan, for example. He always says that he failed more times than most people. And that was why he became a champion. And just kind of like being okay with running into problems and failing as we go seems to be something that really can help all of us and inspire us to know that we can start a podcast, that we can go through this. So I just really appreciated that and the rest of what you said there as well. And I'd encourage an audience listener to listen to it more than once because there was a lot of gems in there. The other thing that you mentioned was launching and having a launching team. And you mentioned that one of the reasons why you wanted to have a launching team was that it will help you get the word out, and that you had like 500 downloads in the first, I think you said 24 hours. And based on your finding a launch team and you using a launch team and feeling like you might not have had your name out there yet, like you said, a nobody, which is awesome because I felt the same way too. Like I was like, who am I? So that was all good. But I wanted to find out, what did that launch team do specifically that helped you get those downloads or the ratings or reviews? Yeah, I would be happy to share that. So I identified members of my launch team. I segmented them into groups. I had my family group. So my mom, my dad, who I literally had to tell him what a podcast was in order for him to support and participate. I had friends in different organizations that I was a part of. I was on a board of a nonprofit organization. I had a group of mom friends. I had a group of friends just in different stages of life. And so for each of those groups of friends, I had a slightly different message for them. And so I would email them and say, hey, I am launching a podcast and I want you to know all about it. Like, I would love to have your support. I'm starting a launch team, and there are just a couple things that I would love for you to do as a launch team. I really pitched it as this fun opportunity for them to have an inside look on something that I was creating. I also brought my Instagram followers along for the ride. They knew from the moment that I first started ideating, they helped me choose the name of my podcast. So whenever
ideating? That's like coming up with ideas?
Yeah.
I hate that I don't know that word. I'm like, wait a second. Did she just make up a word?
You know it now.
That's funny.
So that creation phase. How often do I want to do this? What do I want to call it? I brought my Instagram followers along for the ride. And so whenever I sent a message and said, hey, I'm putting together a launch team. If you want to be on it, send me a message and I'll point you in the right direction.
Is a launch team a paid role or a free? A volunteer role.
It is a free volunteer role. And so what I did is whenever my trailer went live on Apple Podcasts, I sent them all a message and I said, hey, the trailer's live. I would love your feedback. Click here to listen. All of those listens equal downloads that supported my show in those early days. And I invited them to leave a review. And I even shared example language for a review. Hey, I know I have a brand new show. The first episode isn't live yet. I would love for you to leave a review after you listen to the trailer saying that you're excited about the show coming up. So I had 10, 15 reviews before the first episode ever went live. And so whenever the day that leading up to the show going live, I was emailing them on a somewhat regular basis, letting them know, hey, I just finished recording the first episode. It was really exciting. I can't wait to share this on launch day on December 2nd. Stay tuned for more info. So I was really trying to hype it up. Yeah. And then the day that it went live, I sent out a blast email that was then again customized to each of these groups, asking them to download all 5 episodes, to leave a rating and a review if they had not yet, to take a screenshot of their podcast app, to share it on Instagram stories and tag me in it, to let other people know that they were listening, and to just post something on social media, whether it was LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram, about listening to the show on launch day and recommending it to others. And so it was remarkable. It was exciting. It got people involved, and it really created this ripple effect of, oh, what's Anna doing? And so even if you do it just for the fun of it, it was incredibly valuable. I really do credit the success of my podcast launch to having that launch team.
So, wow. How did you learn how to do that? Did you make this up, or did you learn this from that course that you took, or someone tell you?
Really digging back into the archives, the course might have mentioned it. At this point, it seems like the course might have mentioned it, but being a coach and being in the online business world, there's always a lot of fanfare around launching a new product or a new course or holding a free webinar. And so I took a lot of what I had learned on the business side and tried to apply that to podcasting and building that excitement. I also have a background in public relations. And so I had done a little bit, of course, I'd never launched a podcast for a client, but I had done a little bit of that excitement building and giving clear expectations for taking action in the past.
That's gold. That's so important. I see what you do, and it reminds me of the Trojan Horse. And here's why I say that. Like, the Trojan Horse story might be a fictitious story, but I think it's really powerful. There was the town of Troy that was like literally impossible to penetrate. Like literally, you could not get in. It had a huge wall right next to the ocean, a cliff, and it was a challenge for anyone to ever take it over. And so one of the things that they did to be able to get in, to be able to end up getting in, is they put that horse out in front, make it look like a gift, and then they made everybody else sail their ships away. And in the night, the couple people get out of the horse and just open the doors for everybody else. And while the town of Troy is sleeping. And the way I think of it is it's kind of hard for us to get in front of other people, but by using and leveraging our friends, our family, the people that want to be part of what we do, downloading 5 episodes, sharing on stories, posting on social media, by getting other people involved, you're hacking into their network in a very cool way. And one of the things that I like most about it is that third party support, that third party saying, I listened to this, that third party saying, you should listen to this. It allows us to grow our influence, to grow who we serve so much more rapidly than trying to do it on our own. And I think many people might be afraid to take on this type of process that you did that allowed you to hack into all these different people's networks. But hearing the results that you got, I hope inspire us to be willing to take that action to do something that might be out of our comfort zone so that we can grow our podcast, especially if we're just launching it. And the other takeaway that I got from you is simply, you said leave a review after you listen to the episode. And what I think is interesting is most of the people that I have seen that do ask people for ratings and reviews, they don't say that. And I loved how you also mentioned that you've even kind of given an example of what they might be able to write. But it's the fact that you say to leave a review after they listen that I wanted to highlight. We do marketing and support for podcasters. And that is one of the things that we've noticed that Apple and iTunes and some of these platforms that hold podcasts and support podcasts and publish podcasts like after you syndicate it, I believe honestly, and we've seen this in the past, that they add more weight to a rating and review if the person sounds like they've listened to an episode. So you just making sure to put that as part of it is something that I also wanted to highlight. I have just one more topic that I wanted to touch on with you. It's based on the challenges that you may have today. I know you had a baby in March and maybe that's a challenge, or maybe there's something specific about the podcast that could still be frustrating for you, even though you've done 102 episodes, or that could be something that you're trying to navigate. How do I get past this? Is there anything that you can mention?
Absolutely. So I'm a mom of 2. I have an almost 3-year-old. So we are thick in the terrible 2s right now, the tumultuous 2s. I have an 8-month-old little girl. And so a lot of my time is spent taking care of my kids. In addition to being a mom, I have a full-time job. I very recently stepped into the role of head of community for an amazing company called Clockwise. Clockwise is a smart calendar assistant that helps you make time for what matters by freeing up focus time during your day. And so I have full-time job responsibilities for a company that's based on the West Coast. So I'm located in Louisiana, so that's Central Time, and I work West Coast hours. So my Clockwise day begins at 11 o'clock. But from 9 to 11, 5 days a week, that's the time that I have to work on my podcast and to support my coaching business. So that's 10 hours a week that I have to dedicate to podcasting, coaching clients, and marketing that coaching business that I have. Time is limited. And my biggest challenge is making sure that I'm giving enough time to the podcast, but not just enough time, that I'm giving the best time to the podcast, in that I am spending time working on those things that only I can do. Whenever I stepped into this full-time role, I knew that it was going to be impossible for me to maintain the podcast. And I have had steady growth for the past year, just amazing growth over the past year. And I didn't want to lose that. And so I knew that I needed to have help. So hiring a marketing assistant to take on a lot of those podcast responsibilities has enabled me now to just focus on those things that just I can do. But sometimes that still looks like late nights in my office. Sometimes that looks like waking up at 5 a.m. like I did this morning to finish off the details for my next episode to pass off to my marketing assistant to make sure that we stay on time. And so, yes, I am a time management coach. I know the hacks. I've read all the books, so you don't have to. But that doesn't mean that I don't also struggle with allocating my time and making sure that I'm creating my personal version of work, life, and balance across my family time, my business, and my full-time job.
Yeah. I read a book a long time ago. It must have been 1997 or something like that. And when I read, it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And one of the things that he mentions 2 or 3 times in that book, but enough times that it's really stuck in my head, and it's made me be a more aggressive, not aggressive, that's a wrong word, but it's helped me and supported me to be able to be more persistent in the dreams that I want to come true. And you embody it completely. He says, instead of saying, I can't, he says, ask yourself, how can I? There's a lot of people that I think have children, or they might be a new mom, or they might have relationships and volunteer things that they need to do. Or for example, like you've got a full-time job and you're a mom and you're starting your business and you have your podcast. It's something that many people would say, they would immediately say, I can't start a new business. And then they would go on and say, because I've got my kids, because I'm a new mom, because I have a full-time job. But you instead have basically asked yourself, how can I? Similar to that takeaway that I got in that book, instead of just accepting some fictitious reality, I can't, you've found a way and you're doing it. And it's really inspirational. It's really awesome. And I give you kudos. And I hope that the listener understands that they can do that also. They can do those things also. I'll end with this. Just if you're listening, Anna, her podcast is called It's About Time. It's a podcast about work-life balance. On that podcast, she shares like time management, productivity strategies, real life advice to help listeners and help you to be able to be more effective about your time. In addition, she also teaches like really actionable takeaways. She interviews other people. She helps you to be able to navigate whether you have family, friends, a career, whatever schedule. And so I'd encourage you, if you think that that could be helpful for you, if you think that she can be able to pour into you the way that she has just on this short podcast, then I would subscribe to her podcast. It is already down in the show notes. And then I'll also say, Anna, thank you for taking your time today, like especially as a time management coach. I know that you care about time. I know that you understand that time is valuable, but you gave your time for other people. And I really respect that, admire that. And I just want to mention that I appreciate you for taking this time with us to be able to pour into our listener, to support them. And I hope that it becomes like a total win-win and that the listener is able to gain a lot from this interview. So with that said, I'm going to jump off, but for our listener, as you heard even in this episode, every other episode on this podcast, I try to pour into you by myself, where it's 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, sometimes more, 30 minutes just on one subject. And so that's going to happen on the very next episode. So I encourage you to stick around, and I'll see you on the next episode. Bye for now. If you're glad that you checked out the podcast today, if you got some value out of this episode, some actionable takeaways, I invite you to do one of 3 things. A, you could do a written review on Apple. Let us know what you think. Just an honest written review. B, you could share the podcast with a friend of yours who needs it. Or C, at the very least, implement what you've learned to take your business and your podcast to the next level. And I'll see you on the next episode.